Every conference I've ever been to, right around this time, they all say, I know we're all tired. There are only a couple more sessions, so I won't say that.
We know we're all tired, but now we're going to talk about government.
Yes, right. Are you ready for government? No, so for most of us, a trip to the DMV or to the permitting department or the county clerk is a maybe infuriating experience, maybe a boring experience, maybe a frustrating experience, but for Jennifer Pahlka, it's in some sense an inspiring experience. Jennifer created Code for America, which is a kind of geek Peace Corps for geeks, which places coders and web types in local governments to help it work better. So that's what we're going to talk about. So tell me the status of Code for America. You give out fellowships every year. Mm-hmm. How many fellows have there been, and how many governments? What are we talking about here?
Sure. Okay. Thanks for having me. This is really fun. I appreciate all of you for sticking around and not leaving the room when government comes up. So this is our second year. We've got 26 fellows this year. They're assigned to 8 cities, so basically they're in teams of 3 or 4. Last year we worked with only 3 cities. We had 19 fellows, so it's a little bit different mix this year. So the mix of fellows is sort of designed to replicate, the average startup team. So you have a developer or 2, a designer, maybe somebody with product management skills. And the notion is that they're working like a startup team, and in fact, love to follow Eric Ries because we have them read the Lean Startup the first day they get in. We follow his methodology. They're working like a little startup inside a bureaucracy. And so we have these deep connections with the cities around identifying a problem space where they want to try this new methodology and having that team come in.
And what sorts of projects are people working on? Can you give some examples of what's been done?
So this year we're working with 8 cities. In Detroit and New Orleans both, they're working on a problem you'd probably guess if you wondered if we were doing in Detroit and New Orleans. They're working on blighted property. So for example, city has a certain set of data around the different blighted properties, and the neighbors have a different set of data. They know really that so-and-so's brother is coming to take over this home that seems to be a blighted property. The city tends to demolish that house, the one that's about to be renovated, instead of the several others that really should be. And so we're working on fixing a problem like that. In Santa Cruz, our team is working on streamlining the business permitting process. Much like going to the DMV, many of you entrepreneurs in the audience have had the experience trying to file all the paperwork that you need to file. And it's not a lot of fun, and it's very confusing. So they're creating a much better interface for that process. I'll give you a good example of one of the concrete projects that our fellows did last year in Boston. So they were working on a number of different issues, primarily in the public schools last year in Boston. And in the middle of the year, there was an article written in the Boston Globe about how frustrated parents were because they changed the system of how you could figure out which schools your kid was eligible to go to. And the way that parents were supposed to figure this out was to read a very dense 28-page printed brochure that had a little paragraph in 7-point font about each of the schools. But you could read this entire thing and still not know which school your kid could go to. Right. And so this became a problem for the mayor because it was being publicized very heavily, how frustrating it was. And they asked our fellows to take a crack at it. They did a really beautiful website. It's called Discover BPS. You can see it at discoverbps.org. It's pretty basic. You type in the address where you live, the age of your child, and whether you have any siblings in a public school, and it returns a mapped list of the schools that you're eligible for. And then you can compare and take notes and sort of do all the things that a modern web app will do. And it's not that this is such rocket science. It's that our fellows started coding in August. There was one guy on it full-time, 2 guys working on it part-time, and they pushed it live to the web in October. And we were told if it had gone through normal channels in government, it would have taken at least 2 years and cost at least $2 million. Wow. And this is a real problem for government. The cost is unacceptable. We shouldn't, with the budgets in municipal government right now, massive crisis, we should not be spending orders of magnitude more than we should be on technology like this. The timing is really an issue too, because we have this lack of trust in government, and how can you trust government if they can't fix a problem in less than 2 years? Right. But the other thing that was interesting about it for me is just the way that the app looked and and the way that it felt and the way that it worked. We're so used to these really cluttered, confusing interfaces to government, particularly on the web, where you look at it and you just can't figure out what you're supposed to do. It's laden with a bunch of difficult, confusing language. And we had the fellows come in the very first year. We sat them down and asked them, why are you here? You know, what is it that is driving you to take a year off? They work for a very small stipend. They could be making much more doing something else. They work incredibly hard in very difficult circumstances. And it's a big sacrifice. So, you know, we asked these guys, what are you doing here? And one of them looked at me and said, this guy, Scott Silverman, he said, I'm here because I believe that interfaces to government could be simple, beautiful, and easy to use. And when they pushed BPS, discoverbps.org live to the web, I looked at this and I said, that's a simple, beautiful, easy to use interface to government. And we as citizens have to expect that of government. We've lost the ability to even want that out of government because we haven't seen it, and that's an important part of what we're trying to do. Right,
and when you think about, you know, an organization that's 180 degrees from the Silicon Valley system of, you know, launching, not being afraid to fail, iterating.
Yes.
You know, local government seems the absolute opposite of that. You know, that it's supposed to be ossified and everybody's very risk averse and worried about their own positions. And how do you find a foothold in these types of organizations which run in very different ways? How does the logic of a web company work its way into local government?
Well, I think the surprising thing that I found, I mean, I started this about 2 years ago with some vague notions of what might work. And a real sort of shock about how government worked. And what I didn't realize is there's actually an enormous number of very innovative, creative people in government. I wouldn't call them the majority, but there's enough of them, and I think that's the important part. So the way we run the program, it's a competitive process on both sides. So the fellows compete to be part of it. We had 550 people apply for just 26 slots, so we're getting fantastic people. And we do the same thing with the cities. We make them compete. So this year we've had 32 cities apply for our next year program. We'll probably choose 8 again. But the cities have to demonstrate that they can work with us. They have to have some evidence of innovation going on already, some willingness to take risks, some understanding of what it's going to be like to work with a lean startup group inside a bureaucracy, and that they're willing to take some of the, you know, the political, there are going to be political hits. There's going to be resistance. We know that going in, and so we need good partners. I am very happy to report that there are a lot of good partners in local government. We have many more cities we'd like to work with that we can't. But I think when people think about bureaucrats, there's a certain image that comes to mind. And I'm not saying that, you know, you're 100% wrong about that. But I do see that there's also something called a public servant. And there's many, many more of these. And these are people that are certainly hamstrung by a very difficult system that's holding them back. But they went into it because they actually want to serve the public. And if we can tap that great energy and that instinct and that desire to do well and bring it into a different context, I think there's really something to work with there.
So you come in, you launch a new app or a new interface or what have you. You're there for 1 year, and then you're gone.
Yeah.
And what happens then?
Well, we're supposed to be there for a year and leave. We ended up doing Philadelphia 2 years in a row because we loved working with them and they made a good case for it. But then the notion is that we should only be there for a year because we can't become their innovation ghetto, right? Mm-hmm. We have to, we're showing what's possible, and then we're trying to push the will to change back on them. We're going to leave. You guys need to figure out what you learned from working with us for a year. We need to learn what figure out what we've learned from working with them, and our fellows need to learn that too. But then you guys need to institutionalize the changes that came from seeing what's really possible with technology. And so we try to work with a completely different set of cities every year. Lots of different things happen. I mean, we see a number of changes in these cities. We see new job titles where they have actually hiring civic hackers within government, which is fantastic. We see people who had formerly been really marginalized, like people who had data and were advocating for open data platforms, who'd been, pushed to the side. After a year of Code for America, those guys are getting promoted, and now they're leading. We see all these great sort of structural and cultural changes within city government, which is fantastic, and we have to work with them on the sustainability of the applications. So, one of the things we're seeing, which is great, is that the apps that these guys build are open source, and we had an example last year. Our Adopt a Hydrant program is actually now, looks like it may end up in like 9 cities. People are just wow. finding it on our GitHub account and re-implementing it. So that's one great way that we see these things being sustained. But we're also now looking at how can some of these applications become businesses. So we've just launched this Code for America Accelerator, which is basically a Y Combinator or an accelerator, but particularly for civic startups who will work with government. So some of these things will live on in government, some of them will become businesses.
Wow. All right, so let's say I'm a recent Stanford grad, and okay. I've got a number of options before me. I can take a job at Google, I can join Y Combinator or go the startup route. What's your pitch to me? Why should I take this year and spend it in a city hall somewhere? Okay,
well, I'll pitch you simultaneously on doing our fellowship or doing our accelerator.
Okay, so yeah, great.
Really either one. But yeah, I think that's the thing. Most Stanford grads come out, they're told by the entrepreneurial community, like, solve a problem in your own life. Well, maybe there aren't that many problems in your life if you're a recent Stanford grad. You've got a lot of opportunity in front of you. We've built this amazing internet that does so, this consumer internet that does so much. It makes our lives so connected and so convenient. You are eventually going to hit up against government in your life, and it will be a problem you will have. And so my main pitch is just that this is going to be something that you'll encounter at some point in your life. I think the thing, though, to understand is that it's a $172 billion market, government technology. That's far bigger than it needs to be. It's ripe for disruption. We talk about disruptive by design. This is an enormous market opportunity. There is so much that could be done, so much low-hanging fruit that could be picked in all sorts of areas, and there's just new models that haven't been applied. So it's the last big undisrupted market that needs tackling. It's going to affect you in your life one way or the other. But when it comes right down to it, government, we can't give up on government. We can pretend that it isn't going to bother us. We can pretend to work around it, but only for so long. Our public institutions are crumbling. They're failing because we're not bringing that same spirit of innovation that we're bringing to the media world and to robotics and to all of the wonderful things you've heard about today. We need to be bringing that to government if we're really going to have a society that works. So Tim O'Reilly is famous for this phrase, which has now been credited to basically every politician who's running right now, but I think it's really his. Government at its core is what we do together. It's that simple, and we do need it to work. We just need it to work a lot better.
It's very easy to get, as you say, sort of dejected and just decide to shut off. You've talked a little bit about the distinction between politics and government. Can you explore that a little bit further for us?
Yeah, I think we're at this moment where there's this huge frustration with politics and the political process. So we have lowest rates of voting, especially at local elections, where you look at this ballot and you're like, I don't even know who I'm voting for. I don't know what these offices mean. I don't know what these candidates stand for. And you have very low rates of participation. So a lot of people are trying to solve that problem. But to me, we're not going to solve the political problem until we actually acknowledge that the political layer is this very thin layer on top of a vast system underneath that we call bureaucracy. And the reason that we're all sitting here going, okay, I worked really hard to get this new person elected into office and nothing changed. You know, it feels like eventually like you're hitting your head against the wall. It's not changing because we're only looking at that tiny, shallow input device at the top, this politics. If we don't actually fix the operating system underneath the politics, the huge bureaucracy, it's not going to matter who we elect. And this is starting to become a much more popular notion. David Brooks has been writing about, Tom Friedman said this in his last column last Sunday in the Times, you know, it's not going to matter who we elect. We really have to look at it like a giant bloated, I mean, you know, I'm not a software programmer, so hopefully this is an accurate metaphor, but it's like a giant bloated operating system. You change the font on the home screen, it doesn't optimize the system.
Right.
Until we start getting bureaucratically active, our political activity is going to mean less and less.
Great. Well, Jennifer, you've done amazing work over the last couple of years, and in honor of that, I'd like to call out Miles Nadal, who has a presentation he'd like to give.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, it's really an honor and a privilege to meet you. You know, when we think about entrepreneurship and challenging conventional wisdom, being an insurgent, challenging status quo, we never think about government in the same way. And as you describe what is a $172 billion industry, and your description that said, we need to make, the quote was, we need to make changes in government together. We created the MDC Humanitarian Award to recognize extraordinary people who are using entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, and disruption to make a difference in the lives of other people on a humanitarian basis. And we can't think of a more deserving person or organization than yourself and Code for America as more deserving recipients. So on behalf of all of us here, all of my partners and colleagues at MDC Partners, our colleagues at Wired, we're going to present you with this award and $20,000 as a small investment in your extraordinary initiatives. And hopefully we can see ourselves getting more involved in what you're doing, because I think the things that you are doing will have benefit for many years to come. There was a great quote by Forrest Witchcraft that I use all the time that said, 100 years from now, no one will ever remember the car you drove, the house you lived in, or for that matter, how much money you had in your bank account, but the world may be a different place if you've made a difference in the life of a young person. There's no question in our minds that what you are doing and what Code for America is doing will have generational impact in a very positive way on a humanitarian basis. So please keep up the amazing work. You should be very proud, and we're honored and privileged to give you this award.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I just want to say, thank you so much, Miles, and to everybody at MDC and to Wired and to Chris and Thomas who saw me a couple months ago. I think, you know, we're a really new organization, and this award and the grant means so much to us, and I really appreciate it. And I just appreciate the opportunity for us to be aligned with this notion of disruptive by design. And thank you so much for your support.
Our pleasure.
Okay.